The gold standard is often remembered as a promise that money could be honest, that governments could be restrained, that value could be anchored to something harder than politics, panic, or paper. In that memory, gold feels clean, solid, trustworthy. A metal pulled from the earth beyond manipulation. A monetary order with limits. A system that could keep the world honest. But history tells a more unsettling story. Because the gold standard did not remove crisis. It did not remove bubbles. And when the pressure of war, debt, and collapse arrived, the system that was supposed to impose discipline kept breaking apart. So the real question is not why people trusted gold. The real question is why a system built to preserve trust became so dangerous when societies needed flexibility, credit, and survival. This is not just a story about money. It is a story about trust under pressure, power under strain, and the cost of defending order when the world begins to crack. Before central banks, before modern monetary policy, before governments learned how to manage money through interest rates and balance sheets, societies still faced the same problem. How do you make value travel? Across borders, across generations, across the rise and fall of rulers. Money had to be trusted by people who did not know one another and might never meet again. Gold answered that need with unusual force. It did not rot. It did not rust away. It could be melted, divided, weighed, stored, and recognized far from the place where it was first mined. And just as important, it was difficult to produce. That mattered, because money is never only about usefulness. It is about limits, about what a society believes cannot be created too easily, copied too cheaply, or debased without consequence. Gold carried that belief. It moved through empires, ports, markets, and treasuries, not simply as a metal, but as a form of organized trust. And that is the deeper point. Money was never just a tool of exchange. It was a way of building cooperation between strangers, discipline across distance, and order inside growing economies. Gold felt powerful because it seemed to make trust tangible. By the late 19th century, the gold standard had become more than a monetary arrangement. It was becoming an international order. Britain led the way, then Germany, then the United States, France, and other major powers. Different nations, different governments, different domestic tensions, yet more and more of them chose to tie their currencies to the same metal. That changed the rhythm of the world. When major currencies were anchored to gold, exchange rates became far more stable. A pound, a mark, a franc, a dollar, each could be measured against a shared standard. For merchants, that meant fewer surprises. For lenders, it meant greater confidence. For investors, it made long-distance capital feel less like a gamble and more like a system. Trade expanded. Credit traveled farther. Ports, railways, factories, and imperial networks were financed with a new kind of predictability. And at the center of that world stood London, not just as a city, but as a clearinghouse of trust. Bills were settled there. Capital moved through it. Risk was priced there. The British financial system became the hinge connecting distant economies to a common monetary discipline. From the surface, the arrangement looked remarkably stable. But surface stability can be deceptive, because a system can be orderly without being fair. It can be efficient without being gentle. It can create confidence for markets while creating pressure for the people forced to live beneath its rules. That was the quiet tension inside the classical gold standard. It made the world more legible to capital, but not necessarily more secure for everyone inside it. Beneath that appearance of stability, the gold standard carried a structural weakness that was easy to miss when trade was expanding and confidence was high. The entire monetary system was tied to a single metal. A metal that was scarce by nature, slow to extract, expensive to mine, and impossible to expand on command. That sounded like discipline, and in one sense it was. But economies do not stand still. Population grows, production grows, trade grows, credit grows, debt grows. A modernizing society needs more transactions, more liquidity, more financial room to move. And that is where the tension begins. Because the economy could expand faster than the gold beneath it, factories could multiply, railroads could spread, ports could grow louder, banks could create more claims. But the underlying metal did not necessarily keep pace. When money is tied to something that grows slowly, while the demands of society grow quickly, pressure builds inside the system. And that pressure does not remain abstract for long. It begins to show up in prices. If output rises faster than the supply of money, money becomes harder. More scarce, in effect, more difficult to obtain. That is one of the roads into deflation. Not abundance in the comforting sense, but tightening. A world where goods may be moving, people may be working, businesses may be producing, yet money itself becomes too constrained for the scale of the economy it is supposed to serve. This is the part the mythology often softens. What financial elites describe as monetary discipline can feel very different from below. Because discipline at the level of the system can become pressure at the level of ordinary life. It can mean lower prices, yes, but it can also mean lower revenues, tighter credit, postponed investment, and rising strain on anyone living inside an economy that needs flexibility but is governed by scarcity. The gold standard did not only restrain governments, it restrained societies. And once that gap opened between the needs of the economy and the limits of the metal, the celebrated stability of gold began to reveal its cost. Deflation can sound deceptively harmless. Prices fall, goods become cheaper. At first glance, that seems like relief. But under a gold-based system, falling prices did not mean society was becoming lighter. In many cases, it meant the burden was becoming heavier. Because debt does not fall just because prices do. A farmer could sell crops for less. A manufacturer could sell goods for less. A shopkeeper could bring in less revenue month after month. But the loan they owed remained fixed, and that changed the meaning of money. The same dollar, the same pound, the same promise of payment now carried more weight than before. Money became harder in practice, harder to earn, harder to borrow, harder to repay. That is where deflation stopped being a statistic and became a social force. Investment slowed because future prices looked weaker. Credit tightened because lenders grew cautious. Businesses delayed expansion. Hiring faded. Workers lost wages, then jobs. Under the same monetary system, not everyone suffered equally. Creditors were protected by money growing stronger. Debtors were squeezed by money growing heavier. So deflation was never just about cheaper prices. It was about who had claims, who had obligations, and who was forced to absorb the strain when the money supply could not bend with the needs of the economy. That is how money changes society. The gold standard did not distribute pain evenly. It quietly shifted pressure downward, from the stability of the system to the lives lived beneath it. In the United States, this pressure did not remain hidden for long. It became political. American farmers were among the clearest victims of gold-based deflation because they lived inside a part of the economy that depended heavily on credit. They borrowed to buy land. They borrowed to buy equipment. They borrowed to plant, harvest, ship, and survive between seasons. That model could function as long as prices remained steady enough for future sales to cover present debts. But when crop prices fell, the arithmetic turned cruel. Wheat could sell for less. Cotton could sell for less. Corn could sell for less. Yet the mortgage stayed where it was. The banknote stayed where it was. The obligation did not bend. And that is how a monetary system becomes a social conflict. To a creditor, hard money looked like stability. To a debtor, hard money could feel like slow suffocation. This was the world that gave rise to the free silver movement. Its supporters argued that tying the country too tightly to gold kept money too scarce, credit too tight, and debt too heavy for ordinary producers to bear. They wanted silver coined more freely, not because silver was romantic, but because expanding the money supply could ease deflation and loosen the grip of debt. What followed was not a narrow dispute among economists. It was a struggle over whose pain the monetary system would recognize. On one side stood financial centers, creditors, and defenders of hard money, who believed stability required restraint. On the other stood farmers, laborers, and debt-burdened producers who believed that restraint had already become punishment. By the 1890s, money was no longer just a technical question of convertibility and reserves. It had become a national argument about power, about who sets the terms of value, who benefits when money grows harder, and who is expected to endure the cost. The free silver debate revealed something the mythology of gold often hides. There is no neutral monetary order. Even when a system presents itself as discipline, it still chooses sides. And under the gold standard, many Americans came to believe that the side being protected was not the side growing the wheat, running the small business, or carrying the loan. It was the side holding the claim.
Then came the test the gold standard was never truly built to survive. War. Not a limited conflict at the edge of an empire, but industrial war on a continental scale. World War I demanded money at a speed and volume no 19th century monetary ideal could comfortably contain. Governments had to borrow massively. They had to spend massively. They had to arm millions, move millions, feed millions, and keep entire national economies running under the pressure of total mobilization. This was no longer a world of ordinary trade balances and peacetime discipline. It was a world where survival itself became the central financial question. And that exposed the deepest contradiction inside the gold standard. The system was praised precisely because it restrained governments, because it made money harder to expand, because it imposed limits that politics could not easily escape. But war made those limits intolerable. A state fighting for survival could not allow its treasury to be governed by the slow extraction of metal from the earth. It could not wait for gold flows to decide how much credit, currency, or spending the nation was allowed to mobilize. So, one by one, governments suspended gold convertibility. Not because they had stopped believing in discipline, but because discipline had collided with necessity. That is the turning point. The monetary order that looked durable in peace proved fragile in emergency. The moment society entered survival mode, the promise of gold gave way to the demands of war. And this matters for a larger reason, because it showed that money is never just a rule. It is part of the state's capacity to endure shock, organize sacrifice, and preserve itself under pressure. The gold standard had been celebrated as a foundation of stability, but when the greatest crisis arrived, it could not stretch far enough to hold the world that depended on it. When the war ended, many policymakers refused to believe the old world was truly gone.
They treated wartime finance as an interruption, a distortion, a temporary departure from monetary sanity. And so, they reached back toward gold. Not only because they trusted it, but because they trusted what it symbolized: order, discipline, credibility. A financial world in which governments appeared restrained and currencies seemed to stand above politics. By the early 1920s, restoring the gold standard was not just an economic project. It was an act of restoration in a deeper sense. A way of telling markets, creditors, and rival powers that the age of emergency was over, that the rules still existed, that the old hierarchy of finance could still be put back into place. But the world that emerged from 1918 was not the world gold had once governed. Debts were heavier, states were larger, industries had been reorganized by war, societies had been mobilized, wounded, and altered, and power itself had begun to move. The old monetary order had been built for a different balance of forces, yet many leaders tried to force that shattered post-war world back into the same frame. That is what makes this moment so important. The return to gold was never just about money. It was about prestige, about discipline as performance, about the desire to prove that financial authority had survived the violence of the age. But restoring a symbol is not the same as restoring the conditions that once made it work. And that was the danger. Because this was not simply an attempt to recover monetary stability. It was an attempt to recover an older structure of power, one centered on creditor confidence, fixed hierarchy, and the belief that societies could still be made to bend around the needs of a pre-war financial order. The war had changed the world, but many of its rulers were still trying to restore the grammar of the old one.
Britain's return to gold in 1925 is often remembered as a gesture of confidence. But confidence in money is not always the same thing as health in society. By restoring the pound to gold at its pre-war parity, Britain was trying to recover more than a monetary rule. It was trying to recover status, prestige, the image of London as the unquestioned center of global finance. On paper, the decision looked like strength. In reality, it made the pound too strong for the economy beneath it. British goods became more expensive abroad. Exports lost competitiveness. Industrial districts came under pressure. Factories slowed. Mines struggled. Unemployment spread through communities that were already carrying the fatigue of war. This is the deeper point. A currency can be defended in a way that wounds the society using it. To preserve the appearance of monetary honor, Britain accepted the real cost of economic pain. And that pain did not fall evenly. It landed on workers before it landed on institutions, on industrial towns before it landed on financial prestige, on the productive economy before it landed on the symbolic authority of sterling. John Maynard Keynes saw the danger early. He warned that returning to gold at the old rate would force Britain into unnecessary strain, that the country would be trying to preserve an older monetary image by pushing new pressure onto wages, industry, and employment. He was right. But the warning could not stop the decision, because this was never only a technical debate about exchange rates. It was a political and civilizational choice about what Britain still believed itself to be. And that is why 1925 matters so much. It shows how a monetary system can become a performance of power, how a state can cling to the image of strength even when the social body beneath that image is weakening. To protect the reputation of the pound, Britain asked its economy to bend, and it asked ordinary people to absorb the force of that decision. That is how money changes society, not only through inflation or collapse, but through the quieter violence of policies that preserve monetary prestige
by making real life harder to bear.
This was the trap built into the gold standard when confidence began to crack. As long as people believed the currency would hold, the system could appear disciplined, even elegant. But the moment doubt entered, everything changed. Investors could move funds. Banks could shift reserves. Foreign holders could demand settlement in gold. And once gold began to leave a country, the problem was no longer abstract. It became immediate. Because under the gold standard, gold was not just a reserve asset. It was the foundation of credibility itself. If too much of it flowed out, the currency looked weaker. The peg looked vulnerable. The promise at the center of the system began to tremble. So central banks responded in the only way the system really allowed. They raised interest rates. They tightened credit. They made money harder to obtain. In theory, that was supposed to defend the currency. Higher rates could attract capital back. Tighter money could slow demand for imports. Scarcer credit could reduce pressure on gold reserves. On paper, the mechanism looked rational. But in real life, it could be devastating. Because the same policy that protected the currency also made borrowing more expensive, investment more fragile, and business activity weaker. Factories cut back. Merchants slowed orders. Firms postponed expansion. Households felt money tighten around them. That is the central paradox of the gold standard. To save the monetary order, governments and central banks often had to injure the society living inside it. The defense of confidence at the top created strain below. And the strain did not remain in financial markets. It traveled outward into wages, jobs, production, and local communities. A currency could look more credible to creditors at the very same moment life was becoming harder for workers and producers. That is why the gold standard was never simply a technical arrangement. It was a system of priorities. When crisis came, it asked a brutal question. What must be protected first? The reserve or the society? Again and again, the logic of gold pushed governments toward the reserve. And that meant the real economy was often forced to absorb the shock. This is what made the system look stable from a distance, yet feel punishing up close. The numbers that reassured financial centers were often the same numbers that signaled contraction everywhere else. A defended currency, a preserved peg, a protected stock of gold. All of it could coexist with shuttered businesses, rising unemployment, and deepening social strain. So when people say the gold standard imposed discipline, that is true. But discipline for whom and at whose expense? Because once confidence faltered, the system demanded that human economies bend in order to protect a monetary promise. And that is why the crisis mechanism mattered so much. It revealed that under the gold standard, money was not only a medium of exchange, it was a hierarchy of survival. And when the pressure intensified, the system tried to save itself by making life harder for the people who depended on it most.
The Great Depression became the gold standard's final trial. And in that trial, the system was asked the question it could no longer evade. What matters more in a collapse? Protecting gold or protecting society? After the crash of 1929, the world did not need tighter money. It needed relief. Banks needed liquidity. Businesses needed credit. Factories needed demand. Workers needed wages. Governments needed room to act before economic fear turned into social ruin. But the gold standard pushed in the opposite direction. As pressure mounted, many countries kept defending their gold reserves instead of loosening their monetary systems. They tightened when they needed to ease. They protected convertibility when they needed flexibility. They defended the symbol when the system beneath the symbol
was already breaking apart. That is what made the Depression such a devastating verdict on gold. The crisis was no longer theoretical. Banks failed, production collapsed, trade shrank, unemployment surged through entire societies, and yet the discipline of gold kept telling governments the same thing: hold the line, protect the currency, defend the reserve. The result was brutal. The more economies weakened, the more dangerous monetary rigidity became. And the longer governments clung to gold, the deeper the pain often ran. Britain broke first. In 1931, it abandoned the gold standard, not because the old ideal had lost all prestige, but because the cost of defending sterling had become too high. And once Britain stepped away, something important happened. The system did not end in chaos. The pressure began to ease. The pound could adjust. Policy could loosen. Economic breathing room, however limited, began to return. The United States held on longer. But by 1933, the crisis had become too severe to manage inside the old framework. Banks were collapsing. Output had fallen hard. Confidence was gone. So the United States also broke the link. Gold convertibility was suspended domestically, and the old monetary order lost another pillar. This is the crucial pattern. Countries that left gold earlier often began recovering earlier. Countries that stayed tied to gold longer often endured deeper contraction for longer. That does not mean leaving gold solved everything. It means gold was no longer solving what its defenders claimed it could solve. By the early 1930s, the system once praised as a foundation of stability had become a machine for amplifying collapse. And that is why the Great Depression matters so much in the history of money. It did not just expose a bad policy choice, it exposed a false promise. The promise that a monetary system anchored to gold could remain stable, disciplined, and trustworthy, even when modern societies were breaking under the weight of debt, panic, and mass unemployment.
In the end, the Depression delivered the clearest judgment of all. When the survival of the monetary order came into conflict with the survival of the economy, gold asked societies to sacrifice too much. And once governments finally stepped away from it, the path to recovery, however painful and incomplete, became easier to open. That was the final lesson. The gold standard did not fail because people suddenly stopped admiring discipline. It failed because, in the worst crisis of the modern age, discipline without flexibility became indistinguishable from destruction. After the Second World War, the world did not return to the old gold standard in its original form. The memory of that system was too damaged. Its rigidity had been exposed too clearly. But the desire for monetary order had not disappeared, so a new arrangement emerged. Bretton Woods kept the spirit of gold, but changed the structure. Instead of binding every major currency directly to gold, the post-war system placed the US dollar at the center. The dollar would remain convertible into gold. Other currencies would be tied to the dollar. In theory, this solved a political problem and an economic one at the same time. It promised exchange rate stability for a rebuilding world, but it also gave governments more room to manage domestic conditions than the old gold standard had allowed. That balance was the appeal. The system offered discipline without total rigidity, order without quite the same immediate brutality. A gold anchor still existed, but it sat one step further back, and for a time, that helped stabilize the post-war world. Trade expanded, reconstruction advanced. American financial power became the hinge of the international system. But the old contradiction did not disappear. It changed shape. Because the world needed dollars in growing quantities, dollars for trade, dollars for reserves, dollars for investment,
dollars for the expanding architecture of post-war capitalism. And the more dollars the world required, the more the United States had to supply. That was the tension built into Bretton Woods. Global liquidity depended on the spread of dollars, but confidence in the system still depended on the promise that those dollars could ultimately be tied back to gold. Over time, those two needs pulled against each other. The world wanted more dollar claims than American gold could comfortably support, so the post-war order did not escape the deeper problem. It postponed it. Bretton Woods was not the return of the classical gold standard. It was an attempt to preserve gold's credibility through a new imperial architecture, with the dollar standing between the world and the metal beneath it. And in that sense, the system was both modern and familiar. It promised flexibility, but it still depended on trust in a finite anchor.
By 1971, the final promise at the center of the post-war order had become too large to keep. Too many dollars were circulating across the world. Too many claims had been built on the assumption that, in the end, they still pointed back to gold. But the gold behind that promise was no longer enough. The United States could not keep supplying the world with dollars and still pretend that every critical claim could be honored in metal. So, in 1971, the gold window closed. That decision did not just change American policy. It severed the last formal link between the global monetary system and the metal that had once stood at the center of monetary trust. And yet, the world did not collapse overnight. There was no immediate return to barter, no instant end of trade, no final breakdown of modern economic life. That matters, because it shattered one of the deepest myths in monetary history. The belief that once money leaves gold, disorder must immediately follow. What disappeared in 1971 was not civilization. It was the last official illusion that the modern world could still preserve gold as the final anchor beneath an expanding global system. From that point on, the world moved fully into the age of fiat money. Not perfect money, not apolitical money, but money no longer pretending to be constrained by a promise it could no longer keep. That is why gold never fully disappears from the modern imagination. Whenever inflation rises, public debt swells, or trust in fiat money begins to weaken, the old dream returns. A harder anchor, a cleaner promise, a form of money that seems beyond politics. But history leaves very little room for innocence here. No monetary system stands outside power, not outside war, not outside debt, not outside collective fear. Gold did not fail because it was useless. It failed because societies kept asking money to do two things at once: to remain rigid enough to preserve value and flexible enough to rescue the system when crisis arrived. That tension never truly went away. It only changed form. And that may be the deepest lesson of all. Money is never just about what it is made of. It is about what a society wants protected, what it is willing to sacrifice, and who must absorb the cost when trust begins to break.